Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Student's Guide to Literature. I'm Professor Smith, and I'll be your host. We have a couple of distinguished experts here tonight going to be talking about one of the great Southern classics, one of the great short stories in Mississippi history from Mississippi's own William Faulkner. The name of the story is A Rose for Emily. I'll have you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I'm Joseph Byard.
I'm Dustin Piper.
And these guys have prepared for us an incredible podcast tonight talking about Rose for Emily. Faulkner, of course, a guy who at one point won the Nobel Prize for Literature. He is a guy who brings in many a tourist dollar to the Oxford, Mississippi area as they go and see his home, Roanoke. He has studied across this country and even in different parts of the world. He is beloved by many, a student of literature. And tonight we are going to discuss his 1930 story, A Rose for Emily. Before we get too far into this, though, we kind of need a summary for those who have not yet read A Rose for Emily, or maybe for those who have read A Rose for Emily, but it's been just a little bit of time. Who's going to summarize for us tonight?
So that would be me. So essentially, A Rose for Emily starts off as a narrator. Really is kind of the main character who speaks with intimate knowledge of the town of Jefferson and tells a life of Miss Emily Grierson, who's an elderly and isolated, strong-willed spinster who has recently died after living alone for many decades in a large, decaying, dust-filled house in the town of Jefferson alongside her old black servant named Toby. Really, when Emily was a young woman, her domineering father discouraged suitors. After his death, she took up with a visiting Yankee construction worker named Homer Barron, but the relationship caused a scandal in the town. Eventually, he vanished, and after his disappearance, Miss Emily kind of retreated into her house into seclusion. After Miss Emily passed away, and is buried, a delegation from the town opens a room in her house, and it hasn't been seen for 40 years in the town. In it, they discover a skeleton of the remains of Homer Barron, dressed in his nightshirt on the bed with a strand of Miss Emily's gray hair on the pillow beside him.
Pretty strange stuff, right? What can we conclude about Miss Emily and her relationship with Homer Barron as a result of this? Like, what are the things that we immediately when we read that last sentence? I think the first sentence and the last sentence are key, but when we read that last sentence right there, the one about the single gray hair that they found on the pillow. What obvious conclusion can we draw?
So you can just jump to conclusion. Even a person first time reading the story and not doing any research, you can kind of just jump to conclusion and kind of just read the context clues and say that she killed him and laid beside him
every
night for the time that he was missing.
Yeah. So how is Emily depicted as a traditional Southern belle in this story?
So Miss Emily once had the mayor, and I think it was like 1886 or around there, where she had the mayor actually come to her she got excused from the mayor to not pay taxes. She refused to pay taxes. She basically ran the people that came to serve her papers and all that. She ran them out, refused to pay. So that kind of just showed that her stubbornness and her old Southern ways that she wasn't going to change.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit on that a little bit. You can kind of just tell that in the summary, her father discouraged suitors. She was that traditional Southern belle that the father thought that no man was good enough for his beautiful daughter, and she was always taken care of. She had a servant, Toby, that took care of her even after her father passed away. And
Why do you think, though, that Toby stays around? I mean, he has to know, right?
Yeah,
he has to know.
He has to know.
Somebody had to take Homer Barron up the stairs.
Yeah, I would say there is some behind the scenes where Toby does know. I mean, he is the servant, the gardener. He cleans, cooks, everything, and so he has to know. He was probably just loyal to the family, just like any other old black servant in those times were to the families. And honestly, I mean, if I was put in his shoes, I'd kind of be scared that I would get some rat poison in my food or something that.
She could easily frame him too.
I mean, in those times, it was really easy to frame a black male, especially with a white woman in the South.
Right.
Yep.
Just as like the racial tension was.
Yeah. So, this is a story that has to do as much as anything with scandal, right? And what is the scandal between Emily and Homer? I mean, there's a lot of different, and the town too. We got to incorporate. It's almost like a love triangle, right? We've got Emily, we've got Homer, and we've got the town. What kind of scandal sort of played out here?
So Homer was known for going to the gentleman's
to the gentleman's
bar and all that, and was pretty well known with the men. Well, I think Miss Emily kind of fell for Homer and kind of got discouraged. She grew up in a family, or grew up with a dad that turned everybody away. So she finally meets this guy, and it turns out,
he's this nice, strong Yankee construction worker. She probably has the hots for him, and then she figures
and he's
out,
nice to her.
Yeah, he's nice to her, but I mean, he's kind of in the flamboyant way. I mean, just jump out there and say, Homer Barron is a gay man, and she figures out. So
and then the town is just nosy, trying to figure out what's going on.
But they kind of knew this, right?
Yeah, they kind of knew, and it was kind of probably embarrassing, to say the least, that she fell for a gay man. She probably didn't know that he was gay, and then figured it out.
The feeling of rejection again from her father and another man.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's one of those situations where she probably felt the embarrassment of that. Maybe it's kind of like, well, everybody knew but me kind of thing. But she certainly is not going to let him go, right? She is kind of she is going to make sure that he sticks around. It doesn't matter whether or not he's alive. She's going to make sure that he sticks around.
It's kind of like
a bounty. Is wanted dead or alive. She really doesn't care. She just wants someone to be there. And I mean, it was kind of, I guess, her being locked away for so long after her dad passed away. She kind of went into seclusion, so she probably went senile as well. Mm-hmm. So
it's almost like you don't love me, but you're not going to love nobody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And he was about to leave, and she was going to make sure that he didn't, right? All right, so how does social class, which is a big theme in this story, how does that kind of play a part?
I mean, that's a really good question. And in A Rose for Emily, it highlights the way in which human beings function in a social stratified communities, commenting on the social mores that class depend upon, as well as the psychological and sociological consequences and such hierarchies inspire. I mean, you can kind of, I guess, Emily was kind of in wealth. I mean, she was very wealthy. So, like we said earlier, she got away with a lot of stuff. So Emily is one of the last holdouts of the gentrified society. The narrator constantly remarks upon this fact through his characterizations of her. Miss Emily's entrance into a room, men rise. I mean,
kind of like a spoiled. Oh, you almost want to kind of say like a spoiled brat.
Yeah, like they rise to her appearance. The town leaders hold special tax meeting in order just to discuss taxes for Emily.
Yeah.
So she's
It still gets away with not paying
the
them.
tax laws are rigged just in like her family's honor.
Yeah.
So, and this is kind of, I don't know, this kind of speaks to the same sort of thing, but as what you're talking about. But why do you think the whole entire town showed up for her funeral? I mean, old women die every day.
Curiosity.
You know? And she didn't have a personal relationship with any of them.
Curiosity.
Well, I mean, you do have those. There were the men that kind of like prowled outside her house, kind of like burglars to like see her and stuff like that. A lot of like googly-eyed guys gawked over her because she's a beautiful young woman. They want to see how she was.
At one
and then a lot of other
But
at
then,
one time, but a lot of people they probably just wanted to be nosy. I mean,
well, then some people saw her buying the poison, so
Yeah.
I think that also
Yeah, I mean,
might have.
you probably had like the she said he should
Yeah.
said hearsay. They wanted to put two and two together and play a game of Clue.
Yeah.
And then you had all
murder.
those people who were putting lime in the yard.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, they knew something weird was up there.
Right.
And that's another way where social class comes into play because the judge it tells him, Judge Stephen, he believes in the preservation of a woman's dignity more than bringing a homicidal criminal to justice. So he really just told some men to go out there and spread lima
Like a
around
cover up.
Yeah, to cover it up.
Yeah.
So she was taken care of.
Do you think there's a difference between the men in town see Miss Emily and the women and the way the women see her?
The
I mean-
women are probably jealous. Because,
Yeah,
I mean,
they're probably jealous. I mean, there's probably a lot of married men looking out for her. I mean, if I was, Judge Stevens' wife and I had
found out he's over here covering up this woman's
coming up this
trails.
woman's trails.
It's like, what does she got on you?
Yeah. So, I mean, what would happen if Judge Stevenson's wife killed somebody? I mean, the whole town would want her brought to justice. So.
Yeah, the women can also be a little nosy too. They always want to know what each other's doing, and then here she is cooped up in a house all day, and they also want to know what happened, what's going on.
Yeah. So, do we have some symbolism in this story? And if so, what is it, and what symbols are key?
So Emily herself is actually like a great symbol of the South in the story. She basically resists change when they asked her to pay all her taxes and all that. So she refused and all that, and anything. I don't. She probably didn't even like the people coming up to her house to change the sidewalk and like pay the sidewalk and all that. She just
Common
resists.
laborers.
Yeah, she's resistant to change, and even like when they like. She wanted the mayor to come down to shake her hand instead of writing a letter, like signing papers and all that. She would agree to a handshaking agreement more than she would a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And that kind of represents the South.
Right.
And then
The good old boy system where your word was what you took,
Right.
no matter if it was on paper or
you
not.
spit on your hand, give it a handshake, and that's
I don't know about that. I'm kind of I wouldn't spit on my hand and try to shake another man's hand, but
That's the way it was done in the old days.
yeah. But and then like you got like her home. That's kind of like when she was real young. The house was real clean. They always talked about how clean the house was and how pretty the walls were and all that. Well, here she is being all clean and beautiful, and everybody wants to look at her and everything. And so as she got older, the house kind of got older with her,
Right.
and kind of got deranged and old and dirty and kind of messy a little bit.
So she's a symbol of the Old South, but the house is a symbol of her.
Right.
So,
As it ages with her.
yeah, it ages with her. Yeah. And then there's this other phrase that I love in regards to this, and the narrator calls her a fallen monument. Why? What does that mean? What is the purpose of a monument? What do we?
So, I mean, I'll hit on it a little bit. The purpose of like a monument, I mean, is to be a preservation of a remembrance of to represent the South of how it was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you see in today's society, a lot of people want that to change. They don't kind of like how the South is considered like the Confederate States, and how everyone's wanting to change that. And
we just, here in our area, we just had a statue taken down that had stood in its place for, I don't know, 100 years.
Yeah.
And so, that monument was, standing to something like an older way of life, an older ideology, an older way of thinking. But, this story was published in a time where cars are becoming more and more prevalent. Paved roads are becoming.
America was getting industrialized. Everything was
modernized.
And she couldn't come to the fact to accept the change in America. She was like Bob Wire.
Yeah,
innovated
she was
America.
Horse and buggy. If she had gone out and needed to, go somewhere, there's no way you could ever convince Miss Emily to get in a car.
Imagine if Miss Emily was alive today and saw how it was. She would probably go insane.
She would. Yeah. So she's all so many different things at once: a tradition, a duty, a care. She's a deer, she's inescapable, she's impervious, she's tranquil, she's perverse, she's all of those things that are seeming contrast all at once. And so she's just the key centerpiece of the town. That doesn't mean that they talk about her constantly, but she's always there, looming. Right. She's always, what they call a monument. So pretty big deal. She's kind of a big deal. So maybe that's why everybody went to her funeral.
And it compares her as a fallen monument. So I guess people don't want the town of Jefferson really wouldn't want them to assembly to represent the town of Jefferson anymore.
Mm-hmm. Like how she's stubborn and like they don't want.
They were accepting change and
and she wasn't.
So it's one. And as far as the structure of the story goes, and in a minute I want to talk about your scholarly research, but as far as the structure of the story goes, it starts out with the end, or the next to the last thing. The penultimate thing in the story is that Miss Emily died. The last thing is that they discovered a long gray strand of hair on Homer Barron's pillow. But the next to the last thing is that Miss Emily dies. And yet that's the first thing we're told in the very first sentence of the story. When Miss Emily Grierson died, the whole town showed up, most for curiosity, whatever. Okay, so, and then it goes into a series of flashbacks.
Right. Like all the way back to her childhood. And
why do you think Faulkner chose to tell the story in this way? Why jump around?
I think he was trying to catch your attention at first, like wondering why everybody did show up to her funeral.
Well, I think it was kind of to build suspense in a way. To keep you on your toes, like on the edge of your seat, wanting to know more and more, like to
keep you reading.
Yeah,
basically.
When I was reading the story, I kind of wanted to read ahead, and I was like, no, I can't do this. It's going to be a spoiler alert. But in a way, like when she went to the pharmacy and what was it, arsenic? She got arsenic.
Rats.
I'm like, why in the heck is she buying rat poison?
And then you already know she's dead.
Yeah, like I work for a pest control company. Like I don't just go and be like, hey, Mr. Gary, I need some rat poison. It's not for work, but I just need some rat poison. That would kind of throw a whole bunch of red flags.
Yeah. Plus, from reading just the first sentence, she's already dead. Yeah. So you're wondering, did she kill herself?
Yeah.
And all this.
Hit on like going to the pharmacy a little bit. She goes to the pharmacist and tells the doctor like,
it's not for me.
It's. And he gives it to her anyways.
Yeah.
That's the social class. Like,
it says for rats only.
Is he an accessory to murder? Like, if
you think that
he wasn't really that big part of the story, but now that you think about it, he's such a huge part of the story. He really killed Homer.
He wrote 4 rats on there to get himself off the hook,
right?
In case she did something else with that, That way. If the investigators find the bag,
in today's society, you could kind of puzzle that together. You knew she wasn't using it for rats. He could have strayed her away.
He probably knew, but it goes to show that Miss Emily could just literally get away with murder in that town. So.
All
right,
just that spoiled brat kind of theme popping up.
We got about 8.5 minutes left. Let's look at your scholarly research. You tell me what you were able to find on this story.
So we went on the school's website and through the libraries. We got on Bloom's Literature. It's really good, chock full of information. It's where I found the summary and parts of information of why social class came into play, and so I really didn't reading it. I kind of didn't even understand at first, like the social class content of the short story. But
and in that town, by the way, is the same town, Jefferson, that he uses for the vast majority of his fiction. Which it's a veil cover. We all know it's Oxford.
Yeah,
it's just Oxford.
Yeah.
But Jennifer Smith kind of hits on social class in the short story pretty good. With that's
give us a little quote there, a little reading of it.
So this comes from Jennifer Smith and a social class, A Rose for Emily. She says to attempt to understand A Rose for Emily without accounting for the varied and significant ways in which social class matters influence the text is to take an overly simplistic approach to the work. In this tale, Faulkner makes some not-so-simple subtle comments on the dangerously pervasive ways in which social roles can divide communities. Exploring representations of social standards in Jefferson County helps us to understand better Miss Emily's character, the reasons behind her questionable actions, and the responses that these events provoke.
That reminds me of there is a painting on the wall in our living room. My wife collects all these trendy things from boutique shops and whatnot. There's a painting on the wall of our living room that is a Faulkner quote. And let's see if you can fill in the quote. It says, "In order to understand the world, you must first understand." Any guesses on what that might be?
Yourself.
Oh, that's a good guess. In
Society.
order to understand the world, you must first understand yourself. In order to understand the world, you must first understand society. Nope. That's good. Both good guesses. He said, in order to understand the world, you must first understand a place like Mississippi.
Yeah, I never guessed that.
Yeah, I would have never guessed that, but I mean, that does kind of like hit hard. It's kind of like,
yeah.
I don't know whether to take it offensively or to take it as a comment, because, I mean, you could take that and.
I wish he did live in Mississippi.
I mean, he did live in Mississippi, but.
Born and raised, yeah.
But if you kind of put it in like Homer Barron's shoes.
He did not understand.
Yeah, he did not understand. That's
totally
why,
different.
That's why he came here and got killed for being a gay man, but
yeah,
we'll leave that there.
Basically,
We're not going to get into that scandal right there.
But it's
true. It's just the time. I mean, there was no LGBTQIA+.
Maybe that was more of a northern thing back then. Kind of Yankee.
I'm just thinking about things like it would have been very foreign to some people that somebody could loan some money and then not pay taxes for life. That would have been a very foreign thing, but that's just kind of one of those things. There was no written contract. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there was no, like I'm sure somebody from the outside might say, well, wait a minute, you didn't get this in writing. Let me see it in writing. Let me see. Yeah. Where's the contract? Right. Where are the lawyers? Where's all that? That's not the way it works.
Probably go get Mr. Jimmy from down at the milk farm and
who witnessed it.
Who witnessed me say this and shake this man's hand.
That's right. That's completely different. And there are a lot of customs and things like even obviously post Civil War, And, she still has this manservant living in the house, probably foreign to some people, right? I mean, I think there are probably somebody like Homer Barron, it might have been foreign. And then just the idea of the whole town showing up for the funeral of a person that they never even talked to.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a very foreign concept, right? So it's different, and it's the Old South, and it's traditional, and it's all of those things, right? It's I think what he means there is that people hang tightly to the sense of place, maybe the sense of place. They're attached to where they are born, or maybe there is a pride, like a local pride that, you are. This is us. This is who we are. This is why you see, it's very weird. It's very weird for this to happen. But on occasion, you will see Ole Miss fans rooting for Mississippi State and Mississippi State fans rooting for Ole Miss when they're playing somebody else from when they're playing LSU or when they're playing Alabama, just because it's a Mississippi thing. Yeah.
It's like if you're at a party and even though your arch nemesis is from South Haven and you're from South Haven, but if you're somewhere in Senatobia at a Northwest party and
you can't stand the guy, but you see each other.
You see each other and he's getting into a tussle, and you're like, well, shit, I have to get into a fight now because I got to defend my hometown.
Yeah. So. A lot of people don't understand that concept, and that's probably exactly what Faulkner means, right? So, All right, guys, we're going to kind of wrap it up with any last thoughts that you may have, anything that we haven't discussed that you wanted to discuss. We got anything here that is worth discussing that we haven't already covered? Because I thought we'd covered a lot.
Yeah,
You're talking about tradition and that's us and that is us. All I was thinking when you were saying that is that's a good segue into to the next podcast for when the girls come in here and talk about the lottery.
Mm-hmm. It's all about tradition.
Yeah, it's all about tradition, and they're not getting away from that. And
but you notice how he grew up in Mississippi his whole life. Well, I mean, Emily did the same thing in the same exact house her whole life, and
that's right.
She was born in that house and died in that house.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So,
and you could see the house where his parents owned, not Roanoke, but the house his parents owned when he was a little bit older. It's right across from Abner's in Oxford, if you know where that is.
Right.
It's got a big placard in the yard and all that kind of stuff. All right, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you guys for joining us today to talk about the Faulkner Classic, A Rose for Emily. Well done on all counts, and I think a student who listens to this can have a greater understanding of the depths of this short story, and that's exactly what we want. So thank you for listening to the Student's Guide to Literature. Hello once again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Student's Guide to Literature. I'm Professor Smith, and I'll be your host. Today we have one of the great short stories from the post-World War II era, one that could serve as a warning for how people should behave in society, one that comes with a very definite lesson, a very definite moral. We're talking about Shirley Jackson's classic, The Lottery. Now, usually when someone wins the lottery, that's a very good thing, but not necessarily a good thing in this case. We have with us today a very distinguished panel of experts, and they're going to be discussing the ins and outs of this short story. I'm going to ask you to just very quickly introduce yourselves, beginning right here.
Ambria.
Okay.
Lakeisha.
Yes, but
And it's good to have all of you here, and we know that you're going to be answering some questions, but also telling us a little bit about what you found as far as research goes. But we want to start out, just in case it's been a long time since someone has read The Lottery, we want to start out with just getting a general summary of this story, just kind of a refresher, just kind of like let our minds kind of push the reset button on this story. So who's going to give us a summary of the plot of the lottery?
I will.
Okay.
So basically, the story The Lottery by Shirley Jackson took place the summer of 1948, where a village would come together in the square of the town as if it was an event. It would start around 10 o'clock that morning and take less than 2 hours. Each member of the household would take a slip of paper, while Mr. Summers, who's a character in the story, acted as the overseer of the black box, which the papers was put into the black box. The lottery has been around over 77 years, according to one of the characters by the name of old Mr. Warner. If a person received a slip of paper with a black dot, they would be stoned and sacrificed to harvesting crops. After everyone received a slip of paper, Tessie was the one who received the slip of paper with the black dot, and she was very upset about it, and she felt it was unfair, and she was the one that ended up being stoned at the end.
Okay. Well, that is unfortunate, right?
Right.
That's not the way you want a situation to end up because, again, when you think about a lottery winner, you're like, hey, hooray, this is going to
Right.
change my life. Well,
Right.
for Tessie, it kind of ended
Ended her
well, not
life,
kind of,
right.
it definitely ended her life. She was dead. All right. And the chilling, absolutely chilling last sentence. And then they were upon her. Oof,
Right.
that is tough.
There.
But this is all just kind of part of the tradition of the town. And several towns up in the New England area, we don't know a whole lot about why this takes place, but we do have one hint about why it takes place, and maybe we'll discuss that in a little bit. All right, let's talk about the characters. Who are the characters in this story, and what is their significance?
Okay, I will let you know about the characters. In this short story, The Lottery has several characters in the village where this was taking place. None of the characters really knew exactly where this event started or really the purpose of it. It was a few characters that played a significant role. One character by the name of Mr. Summers was the host of the lottery event for several years. And another character by the name of Mr. Old Man Warner, which approved this event. Mr. Adams was a character that stated that all the other towns had stopped having the lottery event. And Mr. Old Man Warner thought it was a foolish idea to stop it. Tessie was another character, which was Bill Hutchison's wife. And Tessie did show up for the lottery late as if it was not important, continuing doing household chores. And once she was picked as the lottery, she became very upset and was in disbelief.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, what about the symbolism? Because this is a story that is rife with symbolism. So let's hear a little bit about that.
Okay, I'm going to tell you about the symbolism. The characters, the box, the stone, and the lottery themselves in modern day times are just simple things. But in this story, they show a lot. Like the black box itself, the color could mean many things as far as death, darkness, or forsakenness. The characters being okay with this tradition, but not knowing how the tradition started, but yet continue the tradition and think that it was the norm. The lottery itself makes it seem as though the person who gets the black dot is actually being freed from a time and place where killing is brought on by reaping of crops.
Yeah, and that reaping of crops, that was the most important thing to them for sure. I mean,
Right.
even old Man Warner has that statement that we kind of alluded to a second ago. Lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. Right?
Right.
That is, they believed that the crops would grow if they sacrificed,
Right.
right? And that which is a lot of ancient societies believed the same thing, that sacrifice would bring about prosperity.
Right.
All right, but at the same time, you've got to think about why the people in a fairly modern world, 1948 wasn't that long ago when you think about, the ancient cultures of the world. Why did nobody stand up and say that this was wrong?
Well, I feel like it was pure manipulation because of a tradition that was held for so long, and it was only right to keep hosting it because that's all they believed in.
Because that's all they had ever known.
Right.
Right. I mean, even Old Man Warner kind of has this thing where it's like, they say, well, in some town here close by, they've stopped the lottery altogether. And then Old Man Warner's like, nah, stopping the lottery altogether. What kind of crazy fools are they?
Right.
Listen to these kids, They're stopping the lottery. We ain't stopping no lottery. That's just kind of his attitude towards it, and that's something that is kind of part of her warning. If you hang on to outdated traditions, you're going to continue to get negative results.
Right. That's right.
All right. Is there a difference between the way the male and female characters kind of see things in this story, or maybe just the male and female characters in general?
Yes, basically in the story, if you see, the men were chosen to pick first. And I mean, if you really think about it, men are seen as strong, breadwinning. And whereas in that time, women didn't do the heavy lifting that they were doing in the modern day. They stayed in the kitchen, stayed in the house, and just kept the house up. Whereas, even though both men and women can reproduce, the women seem to be more expendable than the men. Yet also the women in the story seem more excited about the stoning than the men, because here the women are, doing something outside of what they're normally doing, that's cooking, cleaning, whereas men are just like, they want to relax. This is a day supposedly relaxed, and they can't.
Yeah, Tessie said something like, "Oh, Plum forgot what day it was," and then like, you wouldn't want me to leave dishes in the sink or something along those lines.
Right.
Like, very clearly saying what her role was in the home, no question about it, and that she kind of had the pressure to get that done.
Right.
All right. So, do you believe that if this was a non-fictional story, do you think the black box would have the same role? Do you think it would be carried on as it did in the tradition? What is the role of the black box? And if this was a real life, would this still have existed in 1948, or do you think somebody would have come in and put a stop to it?
I most definitely think someone would have came and put a stop to it. No, because their tradition was very cruel, and eventually the village would become divided with the older generation versus the younger generation being against the lottery. I feel the younger generation would have discovered a better way to grow crops instead of sacrificing humans as the older generation thought.
There's a movie version of this story. It came out in the 90s, and it's very interesting because it's set in the 90s, and it's the same last names in the town, but it's not the same people. Like, it's not the exact same characters. It's just that nothing has changed, and the lottery still takes place every June 27th, even in the 90s.
Right.
And so, like, he sees the main character comes from somewhere else, like New York or somewhere, and he's got this. His dad dies, and his dad's last request is that he wants to. I don't remember all the details. Something like his dad wants to be buried next to his mother. Well, his mother is buried in this town, in the village, and her date of death is June 27th. Like, but then he starts seeing how many people
Died.
in like, he starts looking at the gravestones and seeing how many people died on June 27th. But there is an absolute universal cover up like, that's the thing. Is like, well, would it really end if it were real life? You would have to think that the state would come
Right.
in and shut this thing down,
Right.
right? But what if? And also, you could probably just put something on Twitter in a matter of moments. We're killing people up here on June 27th.
Right.
But if in 1948, there was no way to do that. Now you could probably write a letter or something along those lines, but like, everything was monitored and everything was hush, and they all bought into this tradition.
Right.
So when a stranger came in from out of town, it was kind of like there was a cover up for everything, and they were all on the same page and they were all together about it, and it was kind of like, a state trooper came by at one time and was like, this guy here says that y'all did such and such on such and such a day. And then like, everybody was covering up. They all had the same story, and they were like,
Right.
no, I don't know what he's talking about. That dude's crazy,
Yeah, everybody died on June 27th.
Right. Yeah. And so, the tradition had to go on, right? The tradition had to, and if they had to block out the outside world, well, fine. They would just block out the outside world. That's just kind of the way it was. So, all right. So, how do you think this whole situation affected the kids? We got kids out here throwing rocks even little Davy Hutchison throws a stone at his own mother. How do you think this whole situation affected the kids?
I believe the children would be affected mentally because they could feel guilty that they would be part of the reason why their friend parent isn't alive anymore. I also believe it also could become a bully tool to make a child traumatized until they reach a certain age to understand that it was just part of the culture that they grew up in.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like, normalize something awful, right?
Awful, right.
And we unfortunately, kids do grow up in societies where not just societies, but kids do grow up in homes, unfortunately, where terrible things are normalized.
That's right.
And, they're now making like some documentaries on that with like some kids who have been taken out of their parents' homes and put into foster care, and then like they'll make a documentary about just how bad their home life was, and it's unfortunate, but like that's what happens here. The lottery is completely normal for these kids.
Right.
They don't know any other way.
No other way. They thinking it's just an event, but at the same time, it's ruining them.
Yeah. So we got a host, Mr. Summers here, who kind of is a guy who is seemingly very like a happy individual, right? Even though he's about to do something absolutely terrible. So why does Mr. Summers, why was he never included in the drawing when he had a family just like all the other men of the village?
Well, Mr. Summers, I feel like he shouldn't have been excluded just because they were saying that his wife was mean and he had no children. But other men that did, just like Tessie, she was a wife and was picked and also stoned to death. So why should his wife be excluded? It wasn't justifiable to me.
I see. Well, Mr. Summers, I've read some, y'all I hope I'm not spoiling anything, but like I've heard Mr. Summers kind of referred to in the past as like the reason why Shirley Jackson chose his last name to be Summers is because he does kind of have like a sunshiny disposition, right? Mm-hmm. And his sunshiny disposition is probably makes him the perfect person to kind of be the host because he can kind of keep this whole thing lighthearted and moving along, and he doesn't have to just like the Undertaker coming in there. All right, now today one of you is going to die. That would have put a completely different spin on this event and what all this whole thing meant because, instead of keeping it from a writing standpoint, Shirley Jackson had to keep the suspense up about what the lottery actually was. We don't know until the very end.
Right.
And so, we kind of start to feel that way. We get some foreshadowing, maybe some hints.
Right.
But Mr. Summers, because he is kind of happy, because he is kind of chipper, we get like the idea that everything is kind of going to be okay until Tessie starts screaming, "It's not fair," and then we
Right.
start figuring out that something's different here. All right, what about culture and religion? What role do those play in this story?
In the lottery, most of what the story follows is ancient times, like an ancient culture. I would say BC, like before Christ, where the sacrifice was given due to a god. Like if you think about the ancient times where all their Roman gods, like they would um, pray or bow down or build temples for these gods. But in Shirley Jackson's story, the only way that it was redeemable was draw blood, and the blood from that person would then be the fertilization for the soul to grow the crops that they needed until next year, not knowing that, it could possibly be a simpler way to do that.
Yeah, that's all. It's all good stuff. It does seem very far from modern, right?
Right.
It seems like something that an ancient society would have. But this is a warning for Shirley Jackson. That like, hey, we've grown out of that. We've come out of that.
Right.
We don't need to hang on to traditions for things that we didn't understand. We understand so much more now, and there is no correlation whatsoever between sacrifice and your crops growing. And so, we need to let this one go. And if we hang on, if we hang on to outdated traditions, we're going to be in trouble as a society. All right. I wanted you to get some scholarly research, some things that, some scholars said about this story. And kind of, wanted you to look on the old internet, that thing, the old internet. Who wants to go first telling us about what they found on the internet? Okay.
I found an article that actually shows the elements of paganism that's reflected in the lottery. So just an abstract of the article, it was basically stating that modern society is usually marked by logical thought and behavior. In the lottery, there is no thought about it. The analysis that this person made was that the pagan thought and behavior reflected in the short story is adopted and applied in the life of the villagers. The elements of it are seen in the tradition or the ritual, which is originated from the ancient culture paganism. So I'm guessing the paganism back then was of the stoning. The tradition or the ritual that the villagers conduct is to sacrifice one of the villagers by stoning him and her. Even though the tradition is scary, but the villagers keep applying it because they believe the ritual can save them. That's something that people who believe in paganism believe, that by doing certain things that goddess or that God can save them,
Right.
or redeem them from their sins of some sort.
Mhm.
Let's see, besides the person being stoned to death, the stone is actually originated from the pagan culture, which was a common weapon during that time. Like before Christ, if you did adultery or some sort, you were immediately stoned to death. So in generalization, the black box with that black dot was the judge, jury, and executioner of the person. But at the same time, it was almost like, even though this person is dying, we're getting something if they felt as though it was a benefit. In actual reality, it wasn't.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Who else has some? That's very good. Who else has some?
Well,
some
I
stuff?
found pretty much two scholarly views in this story, and is really like an example of how the Nazis were slaughtered in the world. where it was happening, and then nobody know anywhere else when they was slaughtering the Jews and the gypsies, and it was only in this place, and nobody all over the world didn't know that this was going on. So the lottery really explains to some degree that the price is to be paid for not questioning, not thinking for oneself. And also the violence occurred in the lottery at the end as a ritual religion to stone the characters to death. So those are two scholarly views that.
That's an interesting one because I knew there was some connection to the Nazis, but you think about it, the fact that the Nazis were just, they convinced Germany that what they were doing was okay.
Right.
And we talked about normalizing things, that here's the reason why it's okay. We're doing something horrible, but here's the reason why it's okay.
Right.
And the villagers kind of felt that same way, right?
Right.
So coming just out of World War II, it kind of makes, perfect sense that, don't be blinded by people who are feeding you lines like, oh, it's totally okay to do this when it's obviously not okay to do this, whatever this might be.
Exactly.
Don't people are going to try to convince you that something horrible is okay. Don't let that be you. Don't fall into it, because the reader would probably go, and she got all kinds of hate mail when she wrote this story, but the reader might go, nobody would ever do that. Nobody would ever say that was okay.
Right.
Nobody, people are going to stand up, but that's the thing about society is it just kind of is what the masses of people do. And it's easy to fall into whatever it is that everybody else is doing and say, okay, this is totally okay. All right, what else do we have? We have one more scholarly view.
Looking up on Google Scholar, Bloom's Literature. This is by Blake Hobby. In his opinion, he says that in an age where lottery denotes legal gambling in the form of public competition, often with scratch-off playing cards and ping pong machines that mix number balls into winning combinations, the significance of Shirley Jackson's short story title may easily be lost. While casting lots is mentioned in the Bible and door prize drawings existed in ancient Rome, modern lottery competition dates back to 17th century in Europe. Jackson's account, however, is both ironic and also macabre. An account of a yearly corn planting ritual in which the winner of a chance drawing is stoned to death. The lottery initially baffled readers when it appeared in the June 26, 1948 issue of the New Yorker.
Oh, so it came out on June 26th, then the lottery was June 27th. Oh,
Right.
I like that. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's great.
Right. And in fact, the story elicited so many letters inquiring about its meaning that Jackson lampooned the letters in a satirical lecture biography of a story, which later appeared in Come Along With Me, part of the novel 16 Stories and 3 Lectures. That was in 1959.
That's cool. I didn't know she did that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So she got a lot of, there was a lot of backlash to the story. And, there were people who were upset that, they're just reading along. They think they got a good short story going on. And the next thing you know, somebody gets stoned to death. And they're like, that's so vile and cruel and, hateful.
I still think it was a good short story. I don't think it was bad. It was very interesting because it did keep me engaged. Like, I wanted to know what the end, and what I do as a reader is I sometimes try to read a story, and when I get like halfway in it, I'm like, oh, I know what's gonna happen. But with this story, I didn't. I literally did not know. Yeah, because when in the beginning you hear, oh, the boys are putting stones in their pockets. That's just boys.
That's what they do, right?
They're just boys.
Yeah.
So when I was like, oh, dang, they finna kill somebody, I'm like, whoa. I didn't
Right.
associate the name with the actual story, but it was pretty good to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a really good story. And again, she kind of wanted it to serve as a warning about not following outdated traditions. We kind of have to look at this through the lens too, which is very difficult for us to do, of all of the United States, the whole entire country was embroiled in one way or another with World War II. If you weren't over there, you were in a factory making bombs, making guns. It consumed the country for 4 years. Our wars today don't really do that. Like the war in Iraq, the war in Saudi Arabia, I kind of forget that it's going on.
Right.
We've been at war for seemingly forever, and I sometimes forget that because it's just like, I don't know. There was no way to do that with World War II. You couldn't ignore it. The whole country shut down.
Right.
There were some, like even sports leagues, that just said, yeah, we're not going to have a season because of the war, and just completely kind of different, than the way it is now. And so, she was in a situation where she wanted to serve this warning, to people who could have fallen into a Hitler-like situation, which would be following what you are fed instead of thinking for yourself and making sure that the decisions are based on doing the right thing.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Morals and values.
Morals and
Right.
values.
Right.
Yeah. Personal morals and values. Absolutely. All right. Well, good discussion. Anybody have anything else that we haven't covered that you want to insert something in your notes that we need to talk about?
I did forget something on the characters with the symbolism. I was reading where 3 distinctive characters stood out with symbolism was Mr. Summer, Mr. Graves, and the Delacours. Of course, Mr. Summer name, when you hear summer, you think bright blue skies, gentle breeze. And of course, he was this happy-go-lucky person, but yet he held this one box that was someone's doom. And the person that assisted him was Mr. Graves. If you think about grave, you think about death, someone being buried. And the Delacour's name translating to meaning the cross.
Yeah, of the cross.
Yeah, of the cross. So that in references to possibly Jesus Christ, but then Miss Delacour being the most excited person and grabbing the biggest stone.
Right.
Doesn't translate to, Christ-like behavior. And yet she's just like, catch up.
Yes.
So those 3 characters, those names struck out more with the symbolism because of the meaning behind their names.
Yeah, though, what, like, you mentioned that with like Summers and Graves and stuff, this was so normalized for them that they forgot most of the time where the black box was.
Right.
It,
was sad.
It's just like was not even that big of a deal.
Right.
So I found that to be very interesting. It's not something that was like,
It wasn't
there's
a
that
big
spooky
deal
big
until it
black
was
box.
like June 27th.
Yeah, and they're like,
all of a sudden,
where do we put that box?
Right.
oh, dang, the box is out.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to about wrap it up for us. And good on you, all 3 of you, for our excellent discussion. We are extremely glad that we were able to shed maybe just a little bit of light on this story, and maybe look at it from a little bit deeper depths, and provide some information that might not be right on the surface when you read this story, but when you scratch just a little bit deeper, you get some things that are really, really worth thinking about and considering. And you really kind of recognize the genius of Shirley Jackson, because it's an extremely well-crafted story.
Yes,
Right.
it was.
All right. Well, thank you to all 3 of you for being with us tonight. And thank you to everyone who has listened to this discussion of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. Thank you for joining us on the Student's Guide to Literature.